So, Professor, quite a week in terms of our relationship with Iran, and so let's maybe try and take it, I guess, chronologically, if we could. The week starts off with this is basically all part of the implementation, or at least. Maybe not necessarily, but certainly a function of the implementation of our of a nuclear agreement with Iran. So we had almost, I guess, on the cusp of the sanctions relief. Five Iranian-American detainees are released. I mean, explain to us who was released in exchange for what, and how much did it have to do with this nuke deal?
The Iranian government, for some time, going back into the last decade, has occasionally arrested Iranian Americans, people with both passports, many of them born and bred in the United States, in Iran on charges typically of espionage or trying to overthrow the government. In many instances, these charges are ridiculous and bizarre. But it seems to have been a tactic of the Iranian hardliners to bother the United States and assert themselves in a way that would make less waves than if they actually imprisoned an American of European ancestry. So they could always make the claim, well, this is actually, an Iranian national, so it's none of your business if we put them in jail. And at the time that the deal on limiting Iranian nuclear enrichment activities was being worked out, there were sidebars between Secretary of State John Kerry and Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif about a set of these prisoners who were still in jail. Many over the years had been released under other circumstances, but there were roughly 4 or 5 in jail, and Kerry wanted them out. The Obama administration did not want to tie the prisoners issue to the nuclear negotiations because it would make it more complex. It might even give the Iranians, a leverage. So they did this as a sidebar.
And what was the actual deal before we get into sort of the maybe some of the specifics of the people who were released and the specifics of the people who were not released? What was the deal? Was it simply just a release, or was it a trade?
Well, it was a kind of trade. There were a number of Iranians who were in the United States who were found guilty of sanctions busting, basically, because the United States had put severe sanctions on Iran. And at one point, Iranians weren't allowed to buy an Apple computer, for instance, because it had high processing capabilities and so forth. So some of these individuals decided to make a buck by breaking the sanctions and were discovered and arrested and tried and were in jail. The Iranians argued that those individuals, as of January 1st, would be guilty of having broken a law that no longer existed, so that it was invidious to keep them in jail. So the United States traded those sanctions busters for the Iranian Americans who had been imprisoned by the hardliners in Iran.
And so what does it say? I mean, I want to analyze the sort of the fact that this happened. I mean, what does it say in terms of Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and his foreign minister Javad Zarif? What does it say in terms of them relative to their own government? What does it say in terms of the broader success or the implications, and we should also see this in light of the prisoner release from 2 weeks ago now. What does it say in that context of the success of this deal? In other words, it feels like on some level, and then we can get to the new sanctions imposed, but it feels like on some level that and maybe this is somewhat obvious, but that the nuclear agreement was the first step of a larger process in some ways, or a really big step of a process that will continue.
Well, I think there are people on both sides who are hoping that the nuclear deal will be the first step in a larger process of rapprochement between Iran and the United States. There are people who are hoping that it won't be, both on the Iranian and the American side. For hardliners on both sides, rattling sabers, making people afraid of the other, raising alarms, acting tough, all of those things are vote getters, potentially. And the hardliners, both in the United States and Iran, would be sorry to lose such a useful plot device for their elections.
Right. I mean, what, with all due respect to John McCain, what would he do if we didn't have some type of contentious relationship with Iran? It seems to me that's all that seems to be left in his portfolio at this point. So we have this situation where these prisoners are released. It I would imagine on some level, does it indicate the power of the reformers in the Iranian government? Does it enhance their power, or is that just simply an indication of it?
I think it does enhance their power. I think these prisoners would not have been released without the behind-the-scenes approval of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the leader of Iran. His instinct is typically to back the hardliners. But both with regard to signing the restrictions on Iranian nuclear enrichment activity and with regard to releasing these prisoners who had been accused of espionage or trying to overthrow the government, Khamenei has now bucked the hardliners, and this cannot be seen as anything but an unadulterated victory for President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif. They are the ones who put their careers on the line, saying a deal could be done with the Americans. And Khamenei said, "You don't know those people. They're not reliable. They're not trustworthy. They'll stab you in the back. But you want to give it a try. That's on you." This is what Khamenei told Rouhani. So Rouhani just won big because he brought back a victory. I was going to say he brought home the bacon, but that's not appropriate in a Muslim context.
Indeed. But metaphorically, at least, let's talk about that when we return. Iran is now open for business, and we'll find out what that means for the global economy. And we will touch on those new set of sanctions and see what they involve. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Professor Juan Cole. So, Professor, we just spoke about the implications of the prisoner exchange, and that it really came about, as you told us, as a sidebar. So it was a sort of tangential, I guess, benefit of the negotiations and the success of the negotiations in terms of the Iranian nuclear deal. How many other sidebars do you think there could be? In other words, are there other potential prisoner exchanges that we could be talking about in separate deals? Are there other side deals to be had?
Well, it's a little murky whether there are other prisoner exchanges being worked on. One of the prisoners who was released hadn't been in the press. We didn't know about him. And then a businessman that we did know about was not included. So it seems that even the best of our journalists doesn't have a complete handle on this particular situation, and probably people in the State Department, if they're working on it, wouldn't want to put it in the press. But the big side effect of the agreement on limiting Iran's nuclear enrichment activities is economic. So on the day that recently that the great powers certified that Iran had met its obligations, President Obama issued an executive order allowing Iran to buy civilian U.S. aircraft, from Boeing and so forth. Mm-hmm. And the Iranians didn't do that. They instead went to Europe for the Airbus, and they've put out feelers for buying 110 of them at something like $10 billion. But there may be some big-ticket items that the Iranians want from the United States, and there are still obstacles to that. The Congress has kept various kinds of obstacles, including difficulties in Iran making dollar purchases on U.S.-Iranian trade, but the president does have some latitude to make exemptions, and so the world economy is slowing down, and China is slowing down quite a lot, and so world trade is kind of in the doldrums. But here's a little bright spot that the Iranians, have years of pent-up demand for a lot of commodities, and they're likely to go on a buying spree.
And they have pent-up demand, and they now have unfrozen assets to which to buy those things with.
That's right. The Iranian economy, has suffered a lot from the sanctions. The World Bank suggested that, they were down to zero growth, but as of the first of this year, the Iranian economy could grow 6% this year because of the removal of the sanctions. So there is a possibility. I think most of the trade deals that Iran is going to strike in the absence of sanctions will be with Europe, maybe more trade with China and Russia and so forth. But there may be some opportunities for greater Iranian-American trade. Eventually, you could imagine some tourism. These are baby steps, but Iran is opening.
Do we have a sense of are there major U.S. industries that have been that are looking to make these type of sales? I mean, I imagine selling that many jets has got to be quite a boon for Airbus. Is there anything that you're aware of on the horizon, or is most of the economic benefit going to be something that is felt at least directly by Europe and by China, perhaps, and other countries? We may get the sort of, secondary benefits of any help to those economies. But is there are there any big ticket items that one can imagine, or is that something we're just going to have to wait?
Well, there's some thinking that the Iranians might buy an awful lot of automobiles now. And, the automobile industry is multinational. So there could be benefits to the U.S. Auto industry from these Iranian purchases. It's estimated that they've been selling about 1 million cars a year in Iran. It could easily go to 2.
Interesting.
So that's if any percentage of that were American cars, and again, maybe some of them would be partly American owned. That would be significant.
So you had mentioned that there was we know there are new sanctions. I mean, tell us about those sanctions and when did they get imposed?
Well, new sanctions were announced right after the prisoners were released on 13 individuals, if I'm not mistaken, who were believed by the United States to have been involved in a missile test. The missile test that Iran did last fall on long-range missile technology did not violate the nuclear deal. There wasn't anything in it explicitly about the missiles, but it did violate American policy towards Iran. And so the United States has unilateral sanctions on Iran, and those kicked in. And in fact, the Obama administration was going to announce those sanctions on December 31st, but Foreign Minister Zarif contacted Secretary Kerry and said, look, that could derail the prisoner exchange. Why don't you wait? So that's why these sanctions were announced only after the prisoners were winging their way to Landstuhl in Germany.
So these don't come as a surprise necessarily to Iran. I mean, how negotiated are they? I mean, how much of it is, look, it's American policy. We also have a lot of domestic pressure. We're willing to, hold off, but we need to do this. We just want to make sure that we don't put you reformers in a precarious position within the context of your government. I mean, is that how these negotiations go?
I think so. I think behind the scenes, the evidence that's leaked in the press is that Mr. Kerry and Mr. Zarif were quite cordial about it all. I mean, the Americans don't want Iran to develop longer-range missile technology because the Saudis and the Israelis, American allies in the region, feel threatened by that. The Iranians want the technology because they view it as defensive, and so that's just an essential contradiction. And those kinds of contradictions exist with regard to the United States relationship to China, for instance, and China is not an enemy of the United States. It's not always a close friend. So I think, Iran is maybe slipping into that territory from being an enemy.
Interesting. And so lastly, what of that one businessman who remains in captivity there? I mean, is there a sense that what happens to that guy? Why was that guy not on the list?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just don't know any details about it. I don't think any of us do. There's something going on, but it's not clear.
Fascinating. Well, I would imagine we can anticipate at the very least that they're probably still talking about this, right? I mean, this is probably something like there's probably like ongoing sidebar negotiations at this point. Is it appropriate to assume something like that?
Well, I think the good thing about the negotiations that Secretary Kerry and Foreign Minister Zarif successfully conducted is that they now have a relationship. Not just they, but there are people at the State Department, Brett McGurk and others, who spent a lot of time with their Iranian counterparts. And so where there is a bilateral issue like that needs negotiating, there are people to call. There been face-to-face contacts. It's not a cold call. It doesn't come out of nowhere. And now, a kind of precedent has been established that the hardliners don't always win. So yes, I mean, I think they're almost certainly working on this issue.
Professor Juan Cole, thank you so much for your insight about this, a very busy couple of weeks, really, month, if you will, for our relationship with Iran. Thank you.
You're very welcome.